is James Iliff. I'm the co-founder and chief creative officer of Survios. We are the creators of Raw Data, which is a sci-fi action combat game that we released for the HTC Vive this past July. It was received with critical and commercial success so far, and more recently we closed a sizable investment round with our new partners, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, or MGM Studios. So, despite these early milestones for us, we still know that virtual reality has a long way to go before it can reach its full potential. So that's what we'd like to talk about today. A little bit about the potential for virtual reality, where we think it's going at Survios, and ultimately how it's going to become the ultimate entertainment medium. So to give you a little bit of background about myself, I had a very early interest in virtual reality from a very young age, in the early 1990s when I was a kid, and I encountered very early VR technology at a mall, and it was, of course, very large head-mounted displays with very large wires, very constrictive play spaces, and the graphics were crude, and the latency was very bad, but the idealism back then for VR was very high, and it was very inspiring. So ever since then, I've devoted myself to studying all the different professions that go into creating VR. So I studied architecture, I studied filmmaking, I studied psychology and interaction design and game design, and even though my college advisors were not very enthusiastic about how often I was changing my major, I carved my own academic path. And that ultimately led me to the University of Southern California, or USC, specifically their mixed reality laboratory. Now, this is the same lab that created a lot of the prototype technology that led to the creation of the Oculus Rift in 2013. So I arrived at the MXR lab in 2012, and me and my future co-founders created a project called Project Holodeck, which you can see pictured up here. On the right side, you can see an early head-mounted display that we were working on. We took some research from the mixed reality lab. They had created a head-mounted display with a very simple phone screen and some basic aspheric lenses and put it in an enclosure. We took that HMD and we put it on a set of ski goggles. This is a very early innovation for comfort that has now become a convention among VR headset manufacturers nowadays. But back then it was a fairly new development. So we took this excuse me. We took the ski goggle design and we put it around a skateboard helmet. And then we actually connected all of this into a backpack laptop. And this allowed us to have a fully self-contained hardware unit so you could move around freely in a virtual reality space and you weren't tethered with wires to the wall or to a computer. So it was effectively wireless. We also had a PlayStation Move wand on the top of the helmet. This is what allowed for positional tracking of the body. So we had a camera on the wall and it would track your head. And we also placed a magnetic coil on the head, and this generated a magnetic field around the user that allowed us to track the user's hands with magnetic tracking technology. This is actually a product known as the Razer Hydra. So we took that off the shelf and we combined that into our Frankenstein monster system. So this is essentially an early predecessor to what we now know as full motion VR or room scale VR, and this was almost 3 years before the HTC Vive was even announced, so it was very early days for us. So why do we call it Project Holodeck? Well, we were inspired by one of our favorite television shows, which is Star Trek. And in Star Trek, there is a room known as the Holodeck that can actually simulate any environment or any world that you can imagine in any time period. And it does this by essentially forming matter at will with a computer. So it generates matter on command. Now we knew that it's going to be a long time yet before we have the technology to generate matter at will, but we knew we can get somewhere fairly close by manipulating the user's senses and manipulating what they can see and what they hear and what they can touch and feel and all of these different types of things. So this is what set us off on our path to create Project Holodeck. And when we realized throughout our development, as we were creating these early VR experiences, we realized two things. And that is VR is active and VR is social. So what I mean by active is it's not a passive entertainment experience. You're not sitting down like you are in a movie theater, just passively watching a screen. You're not sitting on your couch pressing a bunch of buttons like on a console or hunched over on your computer with a mouse and keyboard. It's not a physically passive experience. It's a very physically active experience. You want to be able to get up. You want to move around freely in your space. You want to interact with objects just like you do in real life. And this is a very defining difference that VR brings to the table that no other entertainment medium has had before it. Another key aspect is the fact that VR is social. And I don't just mean that VR is social like social media. This is social in the sense that we socialize in everyday life. We have eye contact. We have facial expressions. We have body language. We animate with our bodies in order to express ourselves. These things are very important for VR experiences, and so we had to build a lot of the technology to do that, such as inverse kinematics that allow you to generate realistic arm movements, as well as things like phoneme detection and a microphone that listens to the sounds of your voice and actually dynamically generates facial expressions based off of just the sounds in your voice, your volume, and things like that. So this is a lot of the early research and development that led us to start creating really exciting entertainment experiences in VR. So at this point, we completed Project Holodeck, and this was in 2013, and we left the academic university, and we founded Survios. And our first big tech demonstration, our first game, was a small game called Zombies on the Holodeck. It was a zombie shooter that was set in a historical Chicago. It kind of had a film noir feel to it, and we wanted the player to feel what it might be like to be in a classic Hollywood horror movie. And this is a good example of what active VR was going to be like. And this is around 2013. So I'll play a short video of this so you can see. This was a newer system that we had generated that had a more compact design with lighter headset and lighter tracking devices. And of course, there's two-handed weapon interaction. You can grab weapons off of a table. You can manipulate it with two hands, and it felt very visceral and lifelike. It's also very violent. So with this demo, we were able to...
Oh, jeez.
Man, there we go. So with that early tech demo, we actually raised our first big round of financing, and that's what enabled us to start laying the groundwork for what would later become raw data. And with raw data, we had significant improvements to our early discoveries. We built out hero classes with primary weapons, a lot of special abilities built on top of those weapons. You can now move around in larger, more lifelike environments. You weren't stuck in one place, so you could teleport around, you could move around. And of course, you could have multi-user interactions. It was a cooperative experience, so we were building off of our early understanding of what socializing meant in VR. And socializing was very key for us because this is how human bonds are formed. We like to work together to achieve common goals, and so we knew we had to create a cooperative experience that built on top of our interaction architecture. So I'll show a short clip from our early access trailer. So now I've given you a bit of a background of our history and how we've come to be where we are. I would like to share a little bit about what the design philosophy is at Survios and how we go about creating what it is that we create. So taking a step back for a moment, it's important to recognize there's a lot of confusion right now in the VR market. There's a lot of VR devices out there, a lot of different headsets, a lot of motion controllers. They have tons of different features, and it can be a very confusing time for developers and for consumers trying to decide what to buy, what to use, what to create, what to essentially develop for, and what to create. So there's a lot of different features that these headsets have. Some of them have positional tracking, some of them don't. Some of them are heavy, some of them are light, some of them are run off of computers, some run off of mobile devices. There's a lot of options out there. And so it's very important for us as VR developers to look through that noise and see past all the noise and just focus on the content that we want to create and not get too distracted by all the devices. Because ultimately, virtual reality is not defined by a device. It is defined by the content that we create, because content is king. And the devices should serve the content, not the other way around. So if content is king, this leads to the question that many people are asking, such as, what is the key to making VR a success? What is the killer app that's going to be successful? What kind of content should we create? And what we realized is this is the wrong question to ask. We should not be asking what is the key to make VR a success. This is a wrong mindset. In reality, VR itself is the key. The question we should be asking ourselves is, what are we unlocking? What doors are we opening? To answer that question, we have to take a look at what virtual reality is. And we realize that VR is the next step, the next evolution in a very long history of art and entertainment since the dawn of time. Ever since we've been scribbling pictures on the walls of caves, to the magnificent architecture of ancient civilizations, to theater and sculpture and painting and photography, and then filmmaking, radio, television, video games, and now we are creating our own simulations. All of this, all of art and entertainment, has been striving to achieve the same goal, and that is to expand the human experience and unlock our creative potential. This is the ultimate goal. So what does VR unlock? It unlocks the human experience. It gives us the opportunity to expand ourselves and expand what it means to be human. So a lot of people are afraid of new technology, and this is always the case. People fear that virtual reality is a form of escapism, that we want to escape from our lives. And in reality, this is just simply not the case. The purpose of entertainment is not to escape. It's not to run away from our lives. It's to evolve our lives. It's to expand our lives. This has been the goal all along. And I feel that VR is the ultimate next step in this evolution. So if VR is about unlocking the human experience and our goal is to expand our lives, then the question you should ask is, what is it that you want to do? At Survios, we like to ask ourselves, we frame it in this way: if you had 1,000 lives to live, what would you do? Would you be an astronaut? Would you be a knight in shining armor? or a speed racer, what would you do? What character would you be? What life would you like to live? What goals would you want to achieve? In a way, VR experiences are like a miniature reincarnation. It's like a small life that we get to live. And it allows us to learn, and allows us to grow, allows us to evolve ourselves. And if it is true that reincarnation is a real phenomenon, it certainly would explain why it is that we are so driven to create and to experience virtual realities. So with this in mind, we're able to translate this directly into a design philosophy. And at Survios, what we like to start with is we ask ourselves, what do we want our players to feel? We start with the feeling and we work backwards. Once we establish what we want the player to feel, then we figure out what it is we want them to do, who we want them to be, the goals we want them to achieve, the world we want them to experience. But we start with that feeling, and we work backwards from there. We don't look out into the market and see what is trending. We don't analyze our competitors to see what they're doing. We don't look at what genres have worked well in the past. We start out by looking internally, in the inside. We don't start out by looking outside. We look inside. What do we want to feel? So for example, with raw data, we wanted to explore the nature of human instinct and the nature of our primal emotions. We know that for thousands and thousands of years, we as human beings have been hardwired to do all kinds of crazy things. We've been hardwired to hunt and to gather and to kill and protect, to love and create and destroy. These are things that we have these very primal urges. And we wanted to explore a release for these kinds of desires, for these kinds of primal emotions. And so we decided we wanted the player to feel like the ultimate badass action hero that they've always wanted to be. And this would give them a venue for releasing a lot of these primal emotions that have existed in our brains for a very long time. So that's how we started building out raw data, as an example. So taking a step back, one more time, I wanted to share a little bit about our conclusions from our years of research and development making VR content and VR applications. And we've distilled down 6 principles of active VR. We call it active VR as opposed to passive VR. The first aspect is immersion. This is the ability to create a lifelike world, a believable environment. The second is presence, and this is the sensation of existing within that environment. So I could have a photorealistic video game on a flat screen in front of me, and that world might be believable. It might be very immersive, but I don't feel like I am present within it. That's what VR enables us to do, is to feel present, to feel like we exist within our immersive worlds. The third is embodiment, the ability to actually have a body in VR, an avatar, a virtual avatar. This gives us the sensation of having form, so we're not just a floating pair of eyeballs. That's a very important sensation to experience in active VR. And the fourth is free movement. This is something that's going to get better and better as the technology improves, but we should be able to move freely about our space and not be tied down by wires that are attached to our computers or weighed down with heavy equipment. It's still very early for us in VR, but this is something that's going to improve over time. And in a very short amount of time, we're going to have a fully wireless VR hardware with very lightweight hardware and peripherals. And this is going to give us the ability to move around freely and feel more liberated. The fifth principle is having shared space. This touches on the social aspects I was discussing earlier. Being able to share a space with another user is very important so that we can achieve goals together and grow our human bonds together in virtual environments. And finally, the sixth point is dynamic spectating. And this is the ability for non-VR users to actually spectate in virtual reality matches and seeing what other VR players are doing, or the ability for VR players to broadcast what they're doing online, or even broadcast it in a live event. We believe this is where the future of esports is headed. And it's a key thing to keep in mind as you build out your VR applications. So in closing, I just wanted to share a quote from The Matrix to echo John's points. This is when Morpheus was talking to Neo about the nature of reality. And Morpheus says, "What is real? How do you define real? I'm trying to free your mind, Neo, but I can only show you the door. You're the one that has to walk through it." So I want to encourage all aspiring VR developers out there that the VR market is a huge opportunity. All you have to do is walk through the door. Thank you.